How's it going, Bears fans? It's Max from Fireside Bears, and today's Stream Clips highlights have been brought to you by Manscaped.com. Make sure to use code FIRESIDE in your next order on Manscaped to receive 15% off. The second I'm getting this thing done, I'm using Manscaped.com. If you like what you see with these clips, make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit that notification bell, and follow us on basically every social media platform, from Facebook to Twitter to TikTok. Thank you guys, and make sure to bear down. And honestly, this is the way that I look at the game now, is the front seven doesn't win you football games anymore. We don't need a solid, four down lineman anymore. Statistically, it's looking like we're ending up by the end of this decade into a consistent 3-4 style defense, where now we only have three people on the line. Matt Rule's defense in Carolina is kind of trailblazing the way. Secondaries win games these days. And I think that's what the Bears are noticing, and they're starting to pivot, is let's start focusing on developing young secondary players. Let's kind of take a step back. Let's use the talent we have, though it's aging. They still can get the job done. The run defense has still been consistently good. So I'm not even that concerned about our young defensive line, because I think we're focused on the right side of the defensive history, which will be who are the teams that were prepared for the defensive shift. And I think the Bears are at the front line of that. And I think that the league will be put on notice here with Sean Desai's defense.
And to kind of add to that, I mean, your defense takes a step back, but what if your offense takes 3 steps forward, right? Look at the Bears side of the ball on the offense, right? Justin Fields is a young quarterback. You have David Montgomery is a young running back. Tariq Cohen's still pretty young. You have him under contract for a couple years. You look at the offensive line too. There's a lot of youth there. There's a lot of potential there. And I mean, the oldest player on the offense, I think, is maybe Allen Robinson at 28. I could be wrong there, but again, you have a young receiving core. You have young weapons. That is what the priority should always be, because again, kind of to your point, Max, defenses aren't statistically winning a lot of these games and winning these big games. You still need a solid defense. Don't get me wrong. You look at the Bucs Super Bowl run this year. They were a 5 seed. They got to that Super Bowl run. Yes, because their offense was one of the best in the league, but they had a defensive push that was just good enough to keep them in games. And you saw how Mahomes struggled without that solid offensive line against that pass rush. You still need a solid pass rush. You still need a couple players on defense. But let me tell you something. If the Bears defense takes a step back, but the offense takes a step forward, I'm going to be happy. I'm going to be a happy camper, because that shows me a sign that finally the Bears are not going to have to rely on the defense to win games like these past 4 years have been since 2017. Even when the team struggled back then, the defense was a top unit. And yes, that means probably the end of guys like Akeem Hicks. You could probably throw in Danny Trevathan, even Khalil Mack in the next couple of years. But if that means the emergence of guys like Justin Fields, Tevin Jenkins, Darnell Mooney, Daz Newsome, etc., I can list off so on and so on. Ryan Pace can build a defense. He did it in 2018. He can do it again. So, yeah, obviously it's a clear indicator this defense is getting old. But Max, you've said all that stuff perfectly with the younger guys. And at the end of the day, if our offense takes a step forward, I'm still happy about this Bears team.
Sam, if that happens, I'd say pinch me, because I don't think we'd be watching the Chicago Bears. I think it would be some weird, like, bizarro Bears where our offense is better. What team is this?
We're in an alternate reality.
Exactly. That'd be great.
But what you saw this offseason was a changing of the guard. And you saw a changing of the guard because Ryan Pace invested so heavily into the defense. And then all of a sudden, as soon as Matt Nagy got here, they used 8 draft picks, the Bears, between 2020 and 2021 on offensive players. And so this NFL draft kind of solidified the Bears finally turning into an offense-first franchise. And yeah, we tried it in the past with Mark Trestman. That didn't work out, but Trestman was never qualified to coach anyway in the NFL. He was always a CFL guru, where the game is significantly slower than anything the NFL has ever been. I'm pretty sure preseason NFL games with backups and 4-stringers are faster than anything that the CFL has to offer. But you ultimately look at it, what this draft is the Bears are finally turning into a modern franchise. You guys touched on the fact that if the offense takes 2 or 3 steps forward and the defense takes 1 step back, that's the trend we're seeing. We're seeing teams load up so much on offense. They're saying, we know it's a pass-first league. Max, you talked about the secondaries winning games. Secondaries are definitely winning games in a pass-happy league, but people also have to understand, you can't invest so much into your secondary that it comes at the expense of your front seven. Why? Because for offenses, who's the guy that makes the aerial attack work? It's the quarterback, and you still need people to get after the quarterback.
So Sam Mustipher is an incredibly interesting talent, considering his unlikely path to becoming a consistent, reliable starter. We look at him as a former captain, offensive captain at Notre Dame. We look at him as a rock on that offense, to a eventual, taxi squad practice member for the Chicago Bears, who's thrown into a starting position because week after week we had injuries that completely decimated the consistency of what I thought was a pretty solid offensive line entering the season. So Sam Mustipher comes in against the Saints. His first game, I think that was week 9, I think week 8. And he has a pretty okay game. It's nothing to write home about. It's nothing awful. He performs pretty well. But what wins him that starting spot, he gets hurt that game, by the way, too, because everyone gets hurt this year for some reason, is 2 weeks later against Detroit. He comes back and he just plays the best game of his career, stuns me, stuns offensive line coach Juan Castillo, stuns the rest of his linemen, and he becomes a starting center, and I doubt he loses that position. So what we see quickly with Sam Mustipher, and I explained this in the video and then in the articles, check it out if you haven't seen it, is he has an incredible sense of athleticism and his ability. He has like this third eye that he's not the strongest guy. That's a weakness for sure. You don't want to see an offensive lineman being tossed around like a rag doll, but he has this ability to quickly shift the balance of his feet and his center of gravity that keeps him centered, that keeps him on the ground. So though he's getting pushed back, he's still leaning forward somehow. And he has this great ability to move his hips. So he's pushing back. He's getting pushed back from the stronger defender for sure, but he's moving him away from the play. So he's like losing, but he's turning that into a win. So I like to see Sam as like the little engine that could, because he's not the biggest guy. He's not the strongest guy, but he's getting up that hill. He's making plays. There's only maybe 2 plays in the game that I watched. I watched every offensive snap where he made a mistake and it cost a couple yards, maybe 1 or 2. But every time his athleticism allows him to get to the secondary, allows him to block linebackers, which centers against 4-3 defenses need to do that. If there's not a zero tech, your job most of the time is to pound that linebacker, and he does it. Or if the linebacker's stronger than him, guess what? He takes him out of the play one way or another. He has effort, he has athleticism, he's consistent at the snap, he's consistent off the jump of the snap. Only thing I'd like him to work on, and guess what? That's the easiest thing to work on, is getting stronger, putting on weight, lifting those weights in the offseason. Juan Castillo already said to Brad Biggs that he's put on 15 pounds since he started that game against the New Orleans Saints. So he's getting bigger, he's getting stronger. I don't look at him like an Olin Kreutz. His ceiling isn't Olin Kreutz. I don't think he's like the next Hall of Fame center. Shout out to Olin Kreutz, get him in the Hall of Fame. But I think he has potential to be a really, really good center that's bleeding towards Pro Bowl. So I think he has every tool necessary to do that, and I'm really excited to see where he goes next. But for anyone that's out there that's thinking that he won't be the starting center, I'm willing to put money down. DM me, because he'll be the starting center.
That was a beautiful analysis, and I was already sold on him as a starter, but if I wasn't, I think that's enough to resell me, I guess, once again. You said I'll go to you. I'm just in awe.
Yeah, Sam, thanks. We'll come back to you in a moment as you recollect your thoughts. I think when you look at Mustipher, what had happened was is that you went into the offseason with such limited resources and you weren't sure how you were going to address the offensive line, but the dominoes fell your way with guys like Tevin Jenkins, as well as Larry Barone. But the reality of the situation is that Mustipher was really impressive last year. And I just have this thing for film, Max, where what happens is I watch these guys on TV live during the game and I notice things and I'm like, okay, that player right there. Then I go back and I watch the All 22 on Tuesday mornings during the season. And I automatically see, I'm like, that guy's a hidden gem. I mean, Sam Mustipher is legitimately going to be your starting center, and it just solves a bevy of problems because with having Mustipher at center, What you're doing now is you're making James Daniels expendable. You're making Cody Whitehair expendable, whereas before you would have had Daniels as well as Whitehair at left guard and center, and then your right guard position would have been a question. And Bryson's got a comment here. Does Alex Bars have a chance at right guard? Look, I'll say this regarding Alex Bars. Bears experimented with him last year at both right guard as well as right tackle during training camp. During that week 4 Thursday night showdown against the Bucks, or it might have been week 5 actually, Bars came in and played left guard as well. Bars can play all over the place, but I still think that compared to a guy like Sam Mustipher, he is a year away. Now that's not to discount Bars. I really think that he has a lot of potential to be a future starter because he's only going into year 3. And offensive linemen in this league, when they're durable and healthy, they do play 10, 11, 12 seasons. Bars can be really good. But the question is, how much has he improved? I just think that for him, the starting reps are not there. But you look at the rest of this offensive line. Some people are like, oh, well, Tevin Jenkins, it's a mistake that they're playing him at left tackle. If you watched him at Oklahoma State, you knew that he played pretty much every position except center. And I do year-round scouting on these guys. I mean, I'm already looking at guys for 2022, but Jenkins played wherever. And to play left tackle in the NFL, here's the difference. Look, the Bears are taking Jenkins and they're plugging him into left tackle at day 1 because they want that transition to be smooth. It's not like how they've handled guys in the past where they've put them in one position and then halfway through the season move them, because that's what leads to a mess. So Jenkins is getting the coaching that any other rookie left tackle would be getting from day 1. Really like James Daniels. I know he's going into a bit of a prove-it year, but I do think he's going to be very solid. Cody Whitehair's hands down the best player on this offensive line. I put this in our group chat today. My starting 5 from left to right would be Jenkins, Daniels, Whitehair. Then you have Mustipher at center. You have Whitehair at your right guard spot, and then you're going to have Jermaine Ifedi. But Sam, go ahead.
I think the one thing before I list off, because I mean, honestly, my starting 5 is going to be a mirror of Usayd's, but I think if you look at the difference between this year and last year, right? The Bears they sign Jermaine Ifedi. They sign, can't even think of his name from the Packers as a swing tackle, and they draft 2 7th-round offensive linemen. COVID injuries, it happens. I mean, I think the Titans game, we were down to like 6 healthy offensive linemen or whatever. I get it, injuries happen. But it's kind of to the point of the switch for Tevin Jenkins. The difference is that there's more time and it's being done properly, because last year you were still trying to prove that this was a 2018 Bears roster. So you went out and you thought you had the group for the offensive line. You thought Juan Costello was going to be a magician. He's a very, very good offensive coach. Don't get me wrong. What he did with his offensive line, given what he had, was still very impressive in my opinion. And you expected it to just be productive enough to help out the Mitch Trubisky, Nick Foles dynamic, which makes me want to throw up in my mouth. You look at 2021 now, you have this rookie quarterback in Justin Fields. You bring in 2 very good rookie offensive linemen. And obviously, there's a risk in putting Jenkins at left tackle, right? You're hoping the transition's going to work. You're hoping he's going to be this franchise left tackle. Obviously, there's no guarantee because of the limited reps he had versus at right tackle at Oklahoma State. But that being said, to kind of your point, there's a little bit more kind of lenience and time. There's no like immediate pressure because you have solid depth this year. If you sign Moses, you have even better depth this year. You have guys that need to prove it this year. You have options because of the development of Mustipher and even Bars. You have a lot more options. You have a lot more kind of relaxing moments where it's like, okay, we don't need this group to be the best offensive line unit right away if it's not going to all work the way we think it's going to work. Because again, when you invest into an offensive quarterback, you invest into a quarterback, and I always keep bringing up Justin Fields because I think that's what is important about this. When you invest into the offensive line, it doesn't have to immediately work because you know what you have in a long-term window. The Bears are no longer in that short-term, we still need to prove that we can win, jobs are on the line window. We're in we have a guy who we think is our guy. We brought in these pieces. We're going to see how it works. If it doesn't work, oh well, you look into 2022 and you try again, because that window of experimenting and stuff is back open, kind of similar to what you had with Mitch when he came out in 2017 with the 2018 offseason. But to kind of keep this and wrap this up here, my starting five is the same as you said. I think that's most likely the best option for the Bears. If Moses comes in, I believe you put him in at right tackle. But otherwise, I believe that's probably your best starting five for the Bears this offseason and for the season moving